All right, welcome everybody to this week's special edition of Pluralia Dialogos, where I'm very happy to be joined by three special guests, fantastic analysts who I've admired for a long time. All have been on the show as previous guests, but never all at the same time. So for those listening right now on this live stream, you can all engage in the comment section. I'll try to keep my eyes peeled at the comments for good questions that may emerge. That does happen occasionally, and I do encourage that. But we have today Kit Klarenberg, Pelle, Neroth, Taylor, and of course, Ray McGovern, all here. Thank you guys for joining me today. We've got some serious stuff to talk about, so I'm really looking forward to learning from all three of you. Ray, I want to ask you this though. Are we obviously? I was caught off guard. I think many of us were. It's been very difficult to predict what the Trump administration will do moment to moment over the past year, especially. It seems like there's been a game of chaos, a language of intentional confusion. Oftentimes, outcomes that are not that horrific follow words that are horrific, and that's been sort of I think a pattern we've found. So many people were presuming that not much would emerge out of the dangerous words that were being used by Trump in the days and weeks leading up to what's just happened over the past 24 hours with the strikes on Iran. Some had thought, if at worst, maybe we'd see another replication of something similar to Venezuela at worst. I know you had an optimistic view, so did I. Right now, where are we? Do you think we're on the verge of nuclear war? Do you think that there might be some plan that might involve a rug pull or some big surprise that might derail the trajectory that many are looking at right now as far as an escalation towards World War III? What do you think, Ray?
Well, my usual instinct is, nah, we're not near nuclear war. For God's sake, relax, okay? But not now, not anymore. I think that Israel is going to take it on the chin. Translated from my Bronx language, I think they're going to be obliterated, okay? Now, what are the Israelis going to do? They have the nuclear weapon. They're going to sit around and not call forth the Samson option? I'm not so sure. Okay, would Trump be able to put the brakes on that? I'm sure he would not be able to. So whether the Israelis get driven into extremis, and I think that's an equal possibility right now, given what I know of what Iran did last June, for God's sake, and had a plead with Trump. So, please take a time out. We're running, Well, all I know now is that nuclear war is not so far away. It's not going to be Russia. It's not going to be China. It could be Israel.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, Billy? I got a question for you on that note. There was recently a mutual defense. I mean, we know that China and Russia together have had very long-standing agreements with Iran. 25-year major comprehensive security partnerships have been signed. But more recently, there was a mutual defense program, I think about 2 months ago or so, that these nations had signed on. I don't think it's obligatory necessarily, but it was certainly a deeper commitment towards militarily standing with Iran, and as well as war games, military exercises had been taking place between these countries. Do you think that Iran, what are the chances right now in the coming days and weeks ahead that Russia and China may be drawn into a deeper kinetic conflict? Or do you think that they're going to keep a distance and only support logistically, with equipment and other things like that?
Well, my inclination is it's going to be the latter. I mean, I don't know anything more than what I read in open source material, but I read TASS and Russia Today all the time just to find out. And you read the temperature of the Russian mood, and I don't get any impression that they want to join militarily. I mean, all the experts like Lukyanov and all the various think tank experts. I mean, I think that pro-nuclear guy, whatever his name is, Karaganov, whatever, he's trotted out as a big threat. But I don't get anything that. I don't know how curated the RT choice of voices as commentators. They don't want to alarm the horses, but I didn't get that impression. I think that I've been trying to work out whether the Russians are trying to think how they could benefit of this, because obviously the prices of oil could shoot up into the stratosphere. My thought is that maybe it was they're looking at the Indians. The Indians, John Helber told me the other day, getting close to Israel and NATO, and they want to use the Mediterranean Suez corridor rather than the old using Iran and India as a conduit to Russia and China. So they've realigned themselves, and the Russians are kind of calculating that, I guess. And also, I think they're worried about whether how the British, once the Trump has sort of broken his virginity as a war initiator, whether he's going to be more keen on doing war against Russia, and how that's going to affect. I mean, the death of Khamenei, you know, obviously hitting a foreign leader. Well, does that mean that Putin's going to be in the target? I mean, what's the British former defense secretary said that?
Yeah.
So increases trust. Whether I don't know what the total calculus is, whether they think this is good because it takes away newspaper attention from the Ukraine war, whether they think it's bad because it shows that they're trying to hit the BRICS nations at its most vulnerable point, which is Iran, and they might lead with that. But I don't think, I don't get the feeling the Russians are going to get involved directly, but they will get involved with sending air defense missiles, and it might be a test bed for they might use Iran as America's used Ukraine, you know?
Yeah. Well, on that note of, since you're bringing in Ukraine, Kit, you know, the Zakharova has made the point that up until, you know, right before, really seconds before these strikes occurred onto Iran and the retaliatory strikes in response, it was appearing as though there was some evidence that maybe some dialogue, some negotiation was moving forward. Zakharova has brought up how there were many parallels between the peace talks, so-called peace talks in Oman, and those earlier in Minsk 1 and 2. As far as being fraudulent, being dishonest, designed entirely to just buy time for the inevitable military confrontation. Do you think that it seemed like Iran was agreeing to almost everything, was acting in the most diplomatic of fashions? As far as I could see, there was the Oman foreign minister had stated that the Iranian side had agreed to full IAEA verification protocols, irreversible uranium processing, no stockpiling, a lot of things. And then all of a sudden this happens. So what do you think? Like, what do you think is behind this? And I know you wrote an article called "The Empire Sleepwalking into Iran War Catastrophe" just a couple of days earlier, so that was very prescient. But what do you think is the strategy behind all of this? It seems like a lose-lose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that thank you for mentioning because you know, it always feels nice to be, you know, right in advance. But I mean, I can't claim much credit in that regard, because you've got to bear in mind that the Western media was awash with reports warning that this was going to be a total disaster, and B, it wasn't clear at all what the Americans, let alone the Israelis, were hoping to achieve by this. I mean, of course, Tel Aviv has an interest in trying to crush Iranian resistance and its support for resistance groups in West Asia, so it can, you know, carry on its hegemonic project and create greater Israel. I mean, you know, there's no doubt about that. But I mean, it seemed that, like, Trump maneuvered himself into a catch-22 situation where a failure to act would damage American prestige. It would be very embarrassing, given, you know, the much hyped, much vaunted military buildup in the region. But then acting would also be suicidal as well, and even more destructive. And it seems that Trump chose the destructive path. Now, there was a lot of discussion in the media about how previous Trump gambles, whether that was the murder of General Soleimani at the start of 2020 or the abduction of Maduro, that, you know, these were like kind of big risks that Trump took against the advice of generals and the intelligence service, which paid off. So perhaps he thought that he could achieve something here. But I think that really doing it at all, let alone doing it when the Iranians were on the verge of signing an agreement, which was, you know, very favorable from the US and Israeli perspective, was, you know, absolutely cataclysmic. Now, I wrote a piece. This is back in the summer of 2024, after Iran had struck Israel, in operations True Promise, but before the 12-day war started. And it was very, very clear that based on the emanations of US military think tanks, that it was understood that actually the US is in serious trouble if it starts a war with Iran, because such is the US basing structure. You have a large number of US military installations in West Asia that Iran can hit within minutes. But the US can't counter those hypersonic and ballistic missiles. So there was every reason to believe this would be suicidal and it would be catastrophic. And I think that we're seeing that now. Of course, this has been costly for Iran, but the more costly it is for Tehran, then the greater cost it will impose on their adversaries. Islamic Republic leaders have made clear, well, the gloves are off. This is a war, and we're going to act accordingly. And there are legitimate targets within this. And it's existential from the perspective of the Iranian state and the Iranian people. So clearly, the US and Israel have bitten off considerably more than they can chew here, and it's just quite extraordinary to me that they didn't see this coming, because it was widely predicted that this would be a total disaster. And in the aforementioned empire sleepwalking into Iran catastrophe, I cited quotes from the mainstream media of think tank apparatchiks, Israeli intelligence officials, who were saying that, well, we don't have the assets in theater for a prolonged war. We don't have the assets in theater for a serious ground invasion. Iran has shown itself resilient in the face of relentless attacks and attempted destabilization by the British and the Americans and the Israelis, and that this will not work out well if Trump goes ahead with it. But it also made the point that, yes, that he was in this catch-22 situation. Clearly, a decision was made above the heads of generals like the chief of staff, Dan Kane, who was reported by Axios, the Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post as adamantly opposed to doing this. And then Trump decided to just go ahead anyway, without the force to actually, make a real difference here. And yeah, I think that we're only at the very start of this, and already, as I predicted, the West Asia has been set on fire. US military installations are being battered relentlessly. Israel is being battered relentlessly. There's all sorts of footage of downtown Tel Aviv in flames, and the Strait of Hormuz is closed, through which 500 billion in oil and gas flow annually. That's going to cripple the global economy, and the ships attempting to breach the IRGC imposed embargo have been fired upon. So, I mean, what things are going to look like in a week's time, let alone 6 months' time, is unclear. But the Iranians are clearly in for the long haul to a degree that the US and Israel weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me just interject here and say how delighted I am to be with these two other gentlemen, and you too, Matt. I'm having a flashback here. I just did a little subtraction. 2026 minus 2003. My God, we went ahead anyway in 2003, right? Okay, what was that calculus? Well, we know, because the intelligence was being fixed around the policy. Matter of fact, we have the notes from Tony Blair's briefing after Sir Richard Dearlove met with the Director of Central Intelligence on the 20th of July, 2002, okay? So what we have is the recounting of that 3 days later. Bush has decided to go to war. It will be justified by the conjunction of weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. Oh, what does that mean? Translation. Well, we're going to say that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. Is he going to give them to terrorists? Okay. Those damn terrorists that knocked down 9/11 buildings, those guys are sick. And that famous last sentence, the intelligence and facts are being fixed around the policy. Now, we got off relatively easy for me to say, with thousands of people, maybe 1 million Iraqis dead now, but we're not going to get it easy this time. And bizarre enough, the same rationale is being used by the neocons. Okay, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapon, which Iranians forswore as early as 2003. All right, same year. Okay, and terrorism. They're going to get nuclear, and they're going to give them to terrorists. Now, what's all this about? It's incredible to me how the Zionists, let's say the Zionists, in the person of Marco Rubio, has the president's ear. I thought that Witkoff and Kushner would be a little more businesslike, and indeed they were. And indeed, the Omani foreign minister that monitored these talks on Thursday said, we're this close to an agreement. What happens? Rubio comes in and says, no, Mr. President, we got to zap them. And that's precisely what happened. So I don't want to go on any longer, but this has a deja vu that stinks to heaven, right? And the British, of course, are right in there with us. The UN Security Council meeting was just sickening. I'll stop there.
Yeah,
it really was. And I'll just say, excuse me, the weird lockstep that we have from Mark Carney, world leaders who had positioned themselves as somehow oppositional to Trump, has been startling. Mark Carney has gained great popularity in Canada for his anti-Trump, pro-nationalist, pro-liberal stance representing the rules-based order, but he's come out endorsing the strike on Iran. Ursula von der Leyen, who's come out oppositional to Trump, has come out saying, with Khamenei gone, there is renewed hope for the people of Iran. We must ensure that the future is theirs to claim and shape, says Ursula von der Leyen. The UK defense minister also, when asked, what's your comment on the legalities of the US military intervention? I mean, school children, I think over 100 girls have been killed amongst these strikes early on. It's tragic. But his response was, that's up to the Americans to decide whether what they did is legal or not. My God, what is this? So, I mean, it seems like everybody is piling on right now. And as you pointed out, this is bringing back terrible memories. Almost the exact same formula is being applied as what got us into the lies and the messaging that got us into the first Iraq war are being applied once again. And people who had been formerly anti-war, who rallied around Trump, the whole MAGA movement was an anti-war movement, so many people have become increasingly inclined to rationalize why this is a good thing. So let me ask you, Pelle, what is your take right now on the Trump movement, the MAGA movement? Is it dead, or do you think that there is like something viable there?
I think it's dead. I mean, what is it? 75% of people in America vote against the Iraq war. In the most immediate poll, which I think is rather untrustworthy, or maybe there's just a sort of feeling that once America's engaged, you've got to support it. It's 34 again in favor of these bombing attacks, 44% against. And I've been counting the comments, which I think are more reliable than polls in a way, because it's the more committed people. And about a third of the comments from conservatives are totally against this.
Yeah.
No, I think it's totally fractured, the MAGA movement. And I mean, I'm very much a supporter of the idea that all roads lead to London, you know. And I think the British, the Europeans and the British probably thought that they couldn't get at Trump through Ukraine. I mean, there was a lock there. He'd already committed himself, but they could make Trump an ally by going through Iran. I mean, Trump has got this boomer obsession with Iran, hasn't he? I mean, you know, he was coming of age in the 1970s or whatever during the hostage crisis situation. And so he went on and on about Iran, which seemed at odds to his sort of MAGA approach on other issues. And I mean, I'm totally surprised that this happened because of the national security strategy came out in November, and the Pentagon strategy a short while later saying that, you know, where the main enemy seemed to be Europe and its sort of corrupt warmongering leadership, you know, and then said, well, we're not going to be adversarial towards the Chinese and certainly not the Russians. And the Middle East is one of our less interesting areas. And suddenly this pivot, you know, right? So it's completely, I mean, Vance seemed to have won that victory. But I mean, Trump had this massive Achilles heel, if you like, this sensitivity, which was Iran. And I think the British and the Europeans used it to get Trump on their good sides. Because if they lend their help to Iran now, to America now, the alliance, the old wartime alliance, and they can get Trump's help on Ukraine. And once the missiles have started flying in the way that Trump's done it, it's easier to maybe do something kinetic in Ukraine too, with those long distance missiles that he's refrained from doing. So I'm kind of obsessed with Europe because it's only 200 kilometers away from where I'm at. So I'm worried that it's going to have a knock-on effect on Ukraine.
Kit, you brought up Greater Israel. Do you think that what has been decided right now? I mean, we're seeing a lot of video footage of Israelis in bunkers celebrating, partying. It's jarring to see. There have been strikes, retaliatory strikes, both onto Tel Aviv, onto various parts of Israel, but also adjacent countries that have been hosting U.S. military bases as well. But you brought up Greater Israel. Obviously, this is tied to clearly the whole clean break doctrine put forth in the 90s by Wolfowitz and company for Bibi Netanyahu. Is this benefiting Greater Israel as far as an objective of having this greater Israeli empire, God-given empire from the Nile to the Euphrates, or is this looking more counterproductive? Because for me, it looks counterproductive. It looks like, as Ray had pointed out, this might involve Israel getting wiped out completely. So where do you see this? What do you think is the rationale here as far as Greater Israel is concerned?
Well, I mean, as far as Israel getting wiped out, one can but dream. But I mean, I think that ultimately, that Israel benefits massively from chaos, and the entirety of West Asia, as I say, is on fire now. And in that context, it provides a potential cover for the seizure of more land. I mean, we've seen since the fall of Assad in Syria that the Israelis have been entirely overt about their desire to expand even further. And Netanyahu, in his corruption trial, his defense is not that he was innocent, because he's guilty as hell. It's, well, I'm the Israeli leader who delivered you Greater Israel, so I should be exonerated on that basis. And in the lead up to the late 2024 attack on Lebanon by Israel, the Jerusalem Times published a bizarre article stating that Israelis were biblically obligated to seize Lebanese territory because it was bequeathed to them by God. And there was also, the Times of Israel also ran this subsequently deleted op-ed about how Israelis need Lebensraum. So, I mean, I think while the Israelis are in the bunkers, they can maintain these fantasies of expanding even further. And it must be stressed as well that Pelle noted, all roads lead to London. Something that I've written about is the fact that the basis of the fraud that Iran is seeking use is an MI6 black propaganda operation. This is something I reported on for the Grey Zone, that there was a veteran MI6 dark art specialist called Nicholas Langman, who was posted to was running MI6's Iran desk, and then from there started working with the IAEA. And a leaked CV of his modern professional career notes that he was involved in attempting to disseminate information and warnings about Iranian nuclear ambitions and capabilities, and encouraging European partners and partners in the Middle East, i.e. Israel, to take action on it. Now, this around the same that Langman was engaged in these activities, the Daily Telegraph reported that the British were extremely worried that Obama was going to be, quote unquote, soft on Iran. So, I mean, I think that these two phenomena are not diametrically opposed. I think they're inextricably linked, and this was a way of ensuring that Obama, contrary to what he was saying on the campaign trail, which he was never going to adhere to anyway, that he took a hostile position on West Asia, and the US remained one way or another embroiled there. So, I mean, we have to ask why the British were taking.
We've
lost Kit. All right. Yeah. I'm sure.
Can I just say something? Because I realized I didn't answer your question, which was that I think that the British hate Trump. I mean, they see him as you've just read the British press, the Sunday papers, and the Brits treat the Americans almost like Putin, sort of thing. So America, which has given us so much, and we're part of the American cultural sphere, been for the last couple of weeks, They've been treated Americans like the adversary since Greenland. I think that if they kill the MAGA movement, if they polarize and disrupt the MAGA movement with many people, because MAGA was a broad coalition of leftists or former Democrats like RFK and those big podcasters, who got a lot of young men to vote for Trump. It was seen as a kind of rebellion, a freedom movement or something. Because I had a lot of guests on my show who were of that. They didn't like Trump. They thought he was a good figurehead for a broader movement. Well, they're now going to peel off. They're not going to vote in the midterms. And it seems to me that he's finished. I mean, there's Scott Ritter was on the Napolitano show, yesterday, what it was, saying Trump is a broken man. He was in Mar-a-Lago being filmed by a selfie camera. He looked like he's totally sunken, like an old man. He's aged enormously in the last 18 months. And as Scott Ritter was saying, perhaps hyperbolically, this is a man who knows he's lost his presidency, because he's going to lose the midterms. He's going to maybe be impeached next year or something.
Well, on that question, I'm here. So it was only 3-4 weeks ago that the 3 million Epstein files were made public, were quickly retracted, but obviously this was designed to get to force the international zeitgeist and discussion in a certain direction. I'm still not entirely clear what the objective was, but Ray, do you see some sort of a connection between the strange timing between the release of the Epstein files and the increased war drums in Iran, maybe to pressure Trump to move in a certain direction? Or do you think of these things as separate issues?
Well, it's rather easy to make connections here. Why did Netanyahu go visit Trump in Florida on the 29th of December?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more than just strategic planning. I think he said, now, Donald, it's a little awkward for me to say this, but your Justice Department and the FBI, they're going to be able to attenuate some of the damage from that fellow Epstein. But I don't know. Well, I brought a couple of things with me. You don't need, they're outlined in yellow there. We have this dossier. And we have the originals, and they're not edited or expurgated. So we don't want anything really bad to happen. We like you a lot, but, hey, Rubio, he's the guy to go with. This Witkoff and your son-in-law, forgot about them. And so I think that even though as the intermediary, again, the Omani foreign minister not hinted, but said on what was NBC, we're this close. Yeah, we got something really good going. What did he say, that on Friday? Yeah, Friday. And all of a sudden, they start the attack on Saturday. So this has to do with the Zionist hold on Trump to include the blackmail potential that Epstein raises. Now, I raised that about 3 months ago in a different connection. I could not conceive of why Trump would condone, arm, permit, bless genocide. Let's say the word genocide, okay? There had to be an extra factor here. Biden was bad enough. But why was Trump doing this? Well, I thought even then that the Epstein factor might be at work here. So we don't know for sure, but my guess is, yeah, indeed. This is not only a wag the dog sort of thing, but it's a real concern on Trump's part that he's, they've got him, got him on the short hairs, as we used to say in the Bronx. And he has a limited, and it's not about Rubio to raise this as well, I mean, so I see the Zionists running things here and reversing what gains that Witkoff and Kushner may have made, and I see Trump actually listening to the last person who has his ear, and that happened to be Rubio on Saturday.
Kit, I know that you've been struggling with some technical glitches on your end, but I hope you got them resolved. I was just asking Ray about the connection between the Epstein files and whether that has something to do with what just happened here in the Middle East. And I know you've had some thoughts about this topic for a while, so I'd be curious. Do you agree with what Ray just said, or would you add anything to that idea?
Well, I mean, yeah, sadly, I got cut off when I was in mid-flow. I'm not sure how much of my answer you caught, if any at all. But my point was, the point I was trying to make was that the British and the Americans like routinely use Israel as a kind of send out, and they are, I think they lean into the notion that they're responding to their ally being under attack, and contained within that there is red meat for the left and right to pontificate about how Israel controls the US, and it's like actually Israel is its ability to act is entirely contingent on Western military intelligence and diplomatic support. This could be rescinded, and the fact that it isn't is not because Capitol Hill and Westminster Parliament are terrified of the influence of the Jews. It's because they want Israel to be doing this. And I'm not sure if you caught this, but I've written about how the entire fraud that Iran wants nukes was cooked up by MI6.
Right.
And and you got to ask yourself, well, I mean, yes, Netanyahu has been claiming for decades that Iran is mere months away or weeks away or days away from acquiring a nuke, but it was MI6 who took the lead on disseminating dud intelligence that prompted European countries and also vassal states like South Korea and Japan to take very harsh punitive measures against Iran on the basis that they were developing nukes when they weren't, and also this is a recurrent theme in Ray mentioned the MI6's contribution to the dud intelligence that led to the Iraq travesty, and like we have to ask ourselves, well, I mean, were the British purely acting at American direction, or were they going to business for themselves? In July 2004, there was a Senate Intelligence Committee report on intelligence assessments on Iraq. And it had a specific section which reserved a lot of disdain for how the CIA had relied very heavily on foreign government services, thereby increasing the potential for manipulation of US policy by foreign interests. And that is a coded reference to MI6. So, and we know based on the disclosures of Scott Ritter that in the late 90s, MI6 was running something called Operation Mass Appeal, where they were feeding dud intelligence on Iraq's chemical, biological, and even nuclear weapons capacity to journalists on their payroll, which was then the source of intelligence that Iraq posed a real threat. So, I mean, there's a lot of competing interests here, and you only need to go back to the Suez Crisis, where Israel was prompted to invade the Suez Canal. It got into trouble, and then the British and French came to the rescue of their embattled ally. Even further, the very basis of Israel was envisioned by the British as a loyal little Ulster in the Middle East that would be a source of permanent destabilization and chaos that would justify relentless intervention in order to save this plucky underdog democracy from the evil Arab and Muslim states surrounding it. So I think that we can't view Israeli actions in isolation, and if they are doing something, it's because the US and Britain and other Western sponsors of the Zionist entity want them to do it.
Yeah. On that. Oh yeah, Ray, you want to speak?
Let me just break in here because Kit mentioned a 2006 report out of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Well, the final report, which in 2008, a bipartisan report where prominent Republicans signed on, concluded, as Jay Rockefeller, the chairman, then said, that the intelligence used to support the attack on Iraq was contradicted, uncorroborated, and even, what was the word? Even made up. Okay?
Doctored, yeah.
Even that's the word. Non-existent. No wonder I couldn't. It was that's the word. So non-existent. Well, where did that? Who made up that stuff? Was it MI6? No, it was the Israelis, for God's sake. Okay, they could say that, but Karen Katowski is one of our veteran intelligence professionals for sanity and was a light colonel in the Air Force, sitting in with the neocons who had their own office under Rumsfeld. Okay, she listened to all this drivel. There wasn't a person in that sector that wasn't a neocon, and the Israeli generals are coming in without even checking with security. So Israel was responsible more than 50%. I checked with Karen this morning, okay? I said, Karen, when I testified before the Conyers Committee in the bottom of the basement there, after the Downing Street memo was revealed, after I said, well, it wasn't about mass destruction weapons, it wasn't about ties with Al Qaeda. One representative, they were all Democrats, said, well, Mr. McGovern, what was it then, for Gaza? What was it? And I said, well, I've developed this acronym. It's OIL, OIL. Spell it out. O for oil, I for Israel. It's the Democrats went ape on the Hershey Highway, to refer to back respect. That's what we used to say in the Bronx. Like, they went ape on the Hershey Highway. Okay, Israel. You couldn't mention Israel. Now, in those days, and I'll just finish with this. For years, I thought, well, people say, no, it was Israel. No, it was weapons. No, it was coveting bases in northern Iraq. That was the L, logistics, okay? No, it was oil. Well, I thought, well, it's equal percentage, 33% E3. No. It was over 50% Israel. And Karen, as recently as this morning, testified to that. And she felt so strongly about it that she leaked information to the Knight Ridder reporters, who were the only ones to get it right. And if you need to watch a really good film, watch Shock and Awe by Rob Reiner, where Karen Katowski, impersonated by some actress, leaks all this information, gives it to Knight Ridder, and nobody would give Knight Ridder or McClatchy later the time of day. They went ahead anyway because the Zionists control our media. That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah. Well, I'm sympathetic to both positions, and I think that they are compatible. That British intelligence and Israeli intelligence have this strange connection, but I do tend to think of British intelligence as being much older, more sophisticated, more in effect. I live in a British Commonwealth country with a Privy Council and a deep state that's been embedded in controlling things since the 19th century, even 18th century. So I tend to think of that as leading the dance more than anything, but that's where I'm at. But I've noticed a lot of MAGA influencers currently who are anti-war have been rationalizing and putting out this new narrative that I've seen across the board in the last 24 hours, that Iran, the IRGC, is a British and has been a British operation. I've seen this from Promethean Pact, for example, the splinter group from the former LaRouche organization putting out this messaging around Barbara Boyd saying, that the IRGC, that Khamenei were British assets, and it's good and patriotic that they were taken out. This is a source of evil, and the British are actually behind Iran. Now, what Kit has just said seems to run completely against that. What do you guys have any thoughts on how they're rationalizing? Because I don't fully understand how they're, based on what we've heard presented as far as Israeli intelligence behind things, getting us into all of these unwinnable wars, British intelligence providing intel and guidance into getting us into these crazy crusader wars that are lose-lose. Where is this coming from? What do you guys have any ideas about how this logic is advancing?
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I'm going to give Ray and Kit. Well, Kit's heard it before, but Ray, I think, is new to it because I'm located in Sweden, and yesterday was the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister. And I've seen a lot of the coverage. I mean, it's like Kennedy on steroids for this small country. I mean, people talk about it. Hundreds of thousands of comments on debating forum. I mean, men of a certain age, read books about it and reconstruct every last second of his last steps and talk about gun caliber and bullet trajectories. But nobody ever talks about the geopolitics. And in as much as people do look about the geopolitics and think it's not a lone gunman, they always point at the CIA in some vague way, because it's the big bad evil America. But my sources tell me it's MI6, former MI6 agent. And it makes total sense to me because the British are much closer to Sweden. They own Scandinavia. They thought Scandinavia is their responsibility in particular because of the old, I don't know, I mean, because the Swedes and Scandinavians look up to Britain in an incredible way. America's got a worldwide empire, and Britain is Europe's domain. Europe is Britain's domain. So, I mean, it's very, very hard. I think maybe it's a mistake. Kit and I don't have that mistake, but a lot of the American commentators I watch almost every day, they almost completely exclude MI6 from their calculations. It's Jeffrey Sachs has started talking about the British being at the root of everything, but I think that there'd be more awareness of the British angle to things. And the other big project I just wanted to bring to raise attention was the Dag Hammarskjöld assassination, which was also a British operation, or the British directed operation, or a British let it happen operation. I don't think the Americans were at odds with him because Kennedy wanted to create a new world order with a sort of UN playing a very big role. And he thought that Hammarskjöld was the best statesman out there, and he was destroyed by the neocons, or the neocon equivalents, and by British perfidy. So, I mean, from a Swedish perspective, the two leading statesmen were not done in by the Americans, but by the Brits. So
let me,
Go ahead.
no, let me just comment that this, I don't mean to be flippant, but it seems to me this is a distinction without a difference.
Right.
I mean, who did in Mossadegh? It was a joint operation. And we have the deep state here. Kennedy did not know that Hammarskjöld was going to be killed by the CIA or MI6. But in other words, I think it's interesting how the Swedes and others play it, but it's the same thing in my view. MI6 and CIA are joined at the hip. Witness the fact, as I alluded to before, Tony Blair was in touch with George W. Bush every week by telephone, but he wasn't satisfied that Bush was really going to attack Iraq. And so what did he do? He sent John Dearlove, head of MI6, to talk with Bush. To talk with Bush's closest advisor, the head of his opposite number, the head of intelligence of the United States. And he was told, the go-ahead has been given. That was July of 2002, and the rest all played out. So, joined at the hip is my rationale for this. And again, maybe you would agree, Pelle.
Well, evil has many faces, and it's still evil at the end of the day, as far as its various expressions are concerned. I get it. There's a lot of people who are commenting right now or trying to opinionate about, and it's very early in the early fog of war to come up with straight assessments objectively of where things are at. However, Chaz Freeman has recently stated that Iran could outlast the USA and could even destroy the U.S. Republic if a war of attrition is the path that is selected. If somebody doesn't unleash nuclear warheads or something, if attrition is the game, that could be the case. However, I've heard other commentators saying that Iran is in danger of using up their air defense systems. They've done well in the first 24 hours, but their rate of success in anti-defensive missile maneuvers is reducing at a startling rate. And that Iran is actually not in such a strong position. They've gotten a lot of strikes back, a lot of buildings, a lot of military bases have been hit in Gulf countries. But at the same measure, there's been some very serious targeted decapitations, not just Khamenei, but the defense minister, Ahmadinejad, was just announced dead. The chief of staff of the Iranian forces also killed. So very, very high level people. Kit, where do you stand right now on Iran's strength? Do you think that they're in a better position, or in a worse position compared to what we're hearing out there right now?
Well, I mean, I think that the Iranians have been gravely underestimated. I mean, there have been reports that Trump's already, kind of trying to send messaging around a ceasefire via intermediaries. And I think that obviously, what wins wars, is steel and fire. It's not a desire to win or courage and tenacity like we keep on hearing that the Ukrainians have as they're killed in vast numbers in a completely unwinnable quagmire. But I think it is important to note that, as I mentioned, for the Iranian state and for the Iranian people, this is existential. Whereas from the US and Israeli perspective, this is a military adventure without any real clear rationale or objective beyond potentially getting Iran to accede to negotiations, which they'd already done already. So I think the Iranians started out by emptying their stockpiles or massively depleting their stockpiles of old missiles, of old Shahed drones, and we've seen lots of footage of Shahed drones hitting sites with pinpoint accuracy without hindrance. There is a question now about who can endure longer, and I think that actually the Iranians are, if they're careful, and they've been very careful so far, they are in a position to wait this out, and that is the a majority perspective of the Iranian population. They have been preparing for precisely this for a very, very, very long time. I think that as I mentioned, there are already American casualties as a result of this. I think that public support, which is already not particularly significant in the US, will crater if those casualties, if zeros start getting added to those casualties, and whereas Israel, because it has this sense of invincibility, because their economy is completely by the Americans and the British and the French and other European powers, and they can rely on a endless flow of weaponry and bombs, etc. I don't think that they're probably more than happy to just wait this out as well. I think for the US, this is very serious bungling, and it's easy to get into a war. It's quite difficult to get out of one. And the Iranians so far show no signs of backing down. And as I mentioned, they've undertaken measures like closing the Strait of Hormuz. And
I don't think that they've fully closed it yet. I think that it was momentarily closed but reopened, and then there's obviously a danger of it reclosing again. But clearly, it's in the context of war, it'll easily be closed at any moment. So for sure,
and I mean, just really quickly as well, I think the Ansarallah in Yemen have indicated a willingness to get involved again and close the Red Sea, and I think that in itself is mass disruption to world trade. And there was a very interesting Defense Intelligence Agency report, which I think it's a couple of years old now, perhaps, but it laid out the absolutely devastating impact on insurance costs, in shipping costs, and how this is felt by average consumers at a time when the Ukraine wars caused mass inflation and all sorts of other disruption to trade routes, etc. So I mean, I think we are very much at the start of this, and I think, I mean, by all accounts, there was a report in Ynet, which is a very mainstream Israeli publication, that the US was preparing for a 4 to 5 day operation, which is in line with the kind of assets they have in the theater now. Right. There are no special forces, or let alone ground troops ready to swoop in, and no doubt there was probably hope that the internal unrest being stoked by Mossad and MI6 and the CIA would lead to regime change. That's not going to happen. I mean, at least in the short term. So we shall see. I agree with Ray. I don't think we're on the verge of a nuclear strike, because I think that would be incredibly foolish. But I mean, again, in keeping with the all roads leading to London theme that Pelle and I have touched upon, one of the things that really struck me, and it stays with me to this day, is that on October 8th, 2023, like just over 24 hours after Operation Al-Aqsa Flood started, Hamas's strike on Israel. Robert Peston, who's this mainstream kind of client journalist who just reports whatever powerful people tell him, he took to Twitter, or now X, to announce that he'd heard from British intelligence sources that the Hamas's strike on Israel was the start of a major global conflict, which could lead to war with Iran. Now, bearing in mind the Israelis hadn't come up with a response yet, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen, how did British intelligence know on October 8th, 2023, that we'd reached this point? So I strongly suspect there are people within the Western power structure who want a protracted conflict that neutralizes Iran as a major regional, if not global, irritant once and for all. And I think that on the other hand, you have the Iranians who likewise think, well, we just need to settle this now because it's gone so far that we kind of need to have a brutal punch up and see who prevails. So there is an aspect of watch the space and wait and see, but I'm not seeing any sign of capitulation amongst the Iranians, despite the fact they are in a quite grave situation by many metrics.
Could I just ask a question?
Pelle, I can see you want to speak.
Because I got to go in a few. I got to talk to Karen Kwiatkowski actually.
Yes.
Ray, but you say that the Brits and Americans are joined at the hip, but I mean there was the Butcher thing, which I think was a British operation.
Which?
And Butcher, those soldiers,
Butcher, right?
Right. And then the CIA were pushing back and saying, well, that's not corroborated. Aren't there? I mean, is it true that they're completely joined at the hip? I mean, some people say that the MI6 do everything because they have no constraints. I mean, they're even less accountable than CIA. I mean, American journalists talk about CIA all the time critically. You never get a mainstream journalist in Britain writing serious books about MI6. It's a much more secretive society, and Britain is a much more intelligence adjacent. So the journalists there are very, very intelligence adjacent to the extent that you don't talk about things like Operation Mockingbird,
Yeah. Well, my attitude is that the assets are British in certain circumstances. Iraq, the Middle East, the British really have been around for a long time. They got all kinds of assets, and some of them dress up with Arab uniform, so to speak, or costume. So if they have the assets, they do it. If the Americans have the assets, but I don't see any evidence that they do anything without being coordinated. And the Bucha massacre was a masterstroke because it was precisely then that Boris Johnson put the kibosh on the already initialed Istanbul Accords, which would have prevented the carnage that has happened over the last 4 years. So, what I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to talk about Russia.
Yo, please do.
Yeah. I pretend to know some stuff about Russia. What I was surprised at is when the Russian-Iranian strategic collaboration treaty was being negotiated, and it took about 2.5 years, right? It was clear somebody was dragging their feet. They didn't want to make it a defense treaty. They didn't want to make it a mutual defense treaty, which would require that person to come to. Okay, so I thought it had to be the Russians. My God, the Russians don't get involved in this kind of thing, except with respect to North Korea. Well, they did it. Well, McGovern, now they were, no, you know who was dragging their feet? The Iranians. The Iranians, by my information. So why is this relevant? Well, it shows how serious the Russians look at their soft underbelly, the potential for things to go very wrong in Iran. And if those reports are true, that the Russians are willing to do a North Korea type mutual defense treaty with Iran at a certain point, it was the Iranians that were resisting for God knows what reasons. Well, that says something to me about how serious the Russians look at this. Now, I don't expect the Russians to intervene in any overt way, but we have an alliance now. It's all but short of a mutual defense treaty between Russia and China, okay? They're going to do things together. And if the reports about the U.S. running out of rockets and missiles and other equipment are true, they're going to have lots of time to encourage the Iranians, don't give up. We can't afford to have you go off the stage here. We Chinese depend on, a lot of that oil that comes through the strait, and we Russians are Soviets or Russians or whatever. We don't want Iran to fall into the kinds of hands that MI6 and the CIA can exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. I'll give this to Pelle because I know, Pelle, you got to go at 12 o'clock. You got a hard stop? I know we can go on a few minutes longer for Ray and Kit, but Pelle, I wanted to throw this at you. The Russian Foreign Ministry recently made an announcement, a warning on February 27th or 26th even, that British intelligence is preparing a sabotage operation on Blue Stream and Turk Stream pipelines, which I'll just show right there, that provide Russian oil via, in the one case, Turkey directly, or both cases, Turkey. And a lot of this makes its way to Europe. But that a sabotage operation using Kiev is in play with what we've been discussing regarding the potential shutdown of the Straits of Hormuz, of the Red Sea around Yemen. Do you think that there is an intention to shut down global energy within the context of some controlled form of demolition of the system? Or do you think that this is something that they wouldn't risk doing because this warning was put forth by Russia before the Iran war began? Do you think that this is no longer as much of a danger because they wouldn't risk that type of destabilization of energy, of fuel that is so desperate for the needs of sustaining Europe as well as the broader, transatlantic order? What do you think, Pelle?
Well, all I can say is, I see these warnings from time to time. So it's not particularly scientific, but I see them from TASS and RT saying that the Brits are going to do this and the Brits are going to do that. And I understand why they're doing it, but only in about a third of occasions does it actually come to play. So I think that it's more a case of don't you even try because we're onto your case and we'll do something if you do something, rather than an actual prediction of what's going to happen. And I think maybe the Russian intelligence service has to earn its keep. So it does go beyond what actually happens. And some of the things that have happened haven't been forewarned by Russian intelligence. So that's all I can say. I mean, I think that obviously some people think that on the whole, in the general energy question, that America, I think Lavrov was pointing this out the other day, he's much more skeptical to the Geneva peace talks than Putin. There's apparently factionalism going on, but I mean that Trump is trying to shut out the Russians from global energy markets, and they've got this sanctions package going on in perhaps blockading, the Danish Straits by using their Scandinavian vassals. And then, so this might be part of it, and in the idea that Trump is an energy-focused guy and he's got a lot of oil people behind him, and then America can be the sole oil provider for much of the world. And if you can strangle the Russians economically, then you'll win the war without firing a shot. But then, you have, I think it's Naked Capitalism and other sources saying, I think BNE IntelliNews, there's a guy called Ben Harris. He's very economics focused. I see he seems a smart guy. The point is he hates Russia or hates Putin. So he's kind of credible when he says that Russia's not doing, you can't close Russia off. I mean, it's almost entirely independent now from its global oil sales. And they're running a different kind of economy, which relies on VAT income rather than selling oil. And anyway, they can sell it by the Far East via to China, and China will buy that. So they've actually immunized themselves from the risk of having their super tankers stopped by the Swedish Coast Guard, But and I can't comment on the particular oil, the pipelines, because I'm not read up on that. But maybe that gives a bit of context.
Yeah, I think that's useful. I mean, bringing up the Russia, Iran, Eurasia policy that is seen as such a threat by certain hegemonists, for lack of a better word, rules-based orderistas in the West. There's a couple of core policies that have sort of united Eurasia, and I think a healthy spirit that has created this foundation of a better, healthier system of an order founded upon anti-zero-sum thinking, collaboration. That's what you're looking at there is the international north-south transportation corridor. Iran is obviously the pivot, moving goods through intermodal transport corridor from the north of Russia down all the way to India, through again Iran. You have the obvious Belt and Road Initiative with its southern corridor featured there. Iran is not directly part of the southern, but it is part of the central corridor. Oh, sorry, that's the Middle East Economic Corridor I'm looking at. I'm sorry, I'm playing the wrong one. You've got the Belt and Road Initiative, which is not that. What I just showed is not the Belt and Road Initiative. That's the India, Europe, Middle East Economic Corridor. That's different from what I was describing. What I was describing was the BRI, which does involve Iran playing a key role as a transport route between Europe, the Middle East, and China. But then you have what I was just showing, which is the India, Europe, Middle East IMEC corridor. Modi was just in Israel, guest of honor for 2 days. This was discussed. The idea of a quad with India and Israel as the key of this new Middle East kind of quad was also discussed. It was I think kind of disgusting that he was putting all of his support entirely in his speeches behind Israel against Palestine, which was a very uncharacteristic thing for India to do, since India has historically been against the idea of imperialism per se, and all of a sudden there's this shift. So I'll ask Ray this, and I know Pele, you have to leave, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've got to leave now, guys.
Yeah,
great to see
thank
all
you
of
so much,
you.
Pele.
Okay, talk to you soon. All right, take care. Bye.
Right, bye-bye. Ray and Kit, I want to get both your thoughts on this. Do you guys see, is Modi playing a bit of a game? Is he still more devoted to the BRICS, to the multipolar policy, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or are we losing Modi? Is Modi getting sucked in to this thing that is threatening Eurasian integration, the Eurasian spirit, and these major policies of these corridors? Kit, I'll throw it at you first, and then Ray.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that India is. I mean, we've seen this since the start of the special military operation. Like, I mean, you got to bear in mind that like there was a lot of shock and anger that India, went its own way by not going along with these destructive sanctions and has traded with Russia. And yeah, I mean, the Modi and other Indian officials have appeared at at BRICS events, but I mean, I think it's important to bear in mind that any state that I mean, we see this historically, any state that plays both sides, you can't really trust them, and also I mean, they're constantly hanging on for a better deal from east or west, and that whether a deal is more favorable to them is that's a transitory thing. I don't think, I mean, Trump obviously talks about how we've lost India to China and Russia. I think that was just an ad hominem attack. I don't think it's a reflection of reality. So I think we should be extremely careful. I mean, you've got to bear in mind as well that China and India still have various issues which aren't really resolved around borders. India for a very long time, this is something that I've written about, was used as a beachhead for anti-China operations by the CIA and MI6 for a very, very long time, and it that caused the ultimate objective of doing that was to cause not only a schism between India and China, but also a schism between Beijing and Moscow, because Russia and hitherto the Soviet Union have historically always sought positive relations with India, and China not so much. So I mean, India is an enormously important country economically, geopolitically, and in numerous other ways. But by the same token, they're useful for the West as much as they are for China and Russia as well. So I think I always look upon them with caution, and you've got to bear in mind as well that I just think that a core Russia and China are very keen to attract Muslim countries to BRICS, and Modi is an out and out Islamophobe, and in India is a deeply Islamophobic country. So and they have ongoing issues with Pakistan, who's another kind of potential BRICS contender. So I mean, it's all a bit of a mess, and I certainly wouldn't be throwing in with India, but specifically Modi as a kind of multipolar anti-imperialist figure.
Ray, what about you, man? there are aspects of Modi's policy that I've admired, a general optimism about progress, about technology, a language that gears itself towards anti-imperialism, but at the same measure, there's this other thing. And of course, the Pakistani, we know that there was a riot in Pakistan. Protesters stormed the U.S. consulate. I think 9 protesters were killed by U.S. soldiers in response to the war in Iran. That could be a sign of more escalation, more destabilization in Pakistan. And we know just a year ago, there was a danger of there were exchanges of lethal fire between India and Pakistan that could have resulted in a potential war. That's a major trigger point. Do you see that India is playing a dangerous game right now, or do you think that their wiser heads, cooler heads are evidence that might be inclined to play a more positive role in the broader multipolar program that they clearly would be an advantage? It would be in India's advantage to make peace and to work to play well with their neighbors in China and Pakistan and Russia. But what do you think? What's your take on this?
Matt, I have no particular expertise in these matters. What I just heard from Kit, I can't possibly improve upon. And so what I'd like to do is go back to what I think is the basic issue, and that is that the Zionists have the upper hand here, as before Iraq. And I was just thinking some stuff out before we went on. There was a fellow named Brent Scowcroft, who was the National Security Advisor to George H.W. Bush, a very discreet fellow, who was chairman of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board when we attacked Iraq, okay? And he talked about the evidence for the attack as being very scant, very, very elusive. And after the attack, he said this. He told the Financial Times that George W. Bush is, quote, mesmerized by Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Quote, Sharon just has him wrapped around his little finger, end quote, Scowcroft said. Now, he was angry as hell because he was chair of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. He had all the information, he had all the code word and bigoted information, and he saw that Israel was the main factor in getting us into this god-awful war of aggression, okay? And so he spoke out, very uncharacteristic, mesmerized, okay? Wrapped around his little finger. Well, fast forward to today, Netanyahu has Trump, together with Rubio and other neocons, mesmerized and wrapped around his little finger, whether it has to do with Epstein, and I think a portion of it does, or whether it has to do with Trump being sort of brainwashed into thinking that the Israelis will escape devastation by what they've done jointly now. I still believe that the proof is in the eating of the pudding, as we should say. And that is, if my colleagues now, my colonel friends, they know a lot about what's arrayed there, and I think we're going to run out of ammunition. What does that mean? Okay, that means big deal. The Russians are going to just wait, and so will the Chinese. They will support Iran in getting rehabilitated, but it won't be the same as before, because Israel will be, pardon the word, in my view, obliterated. And so we have the highly ironic prospect of an obliterated Israel, such as it is, and my God, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Is that what Trump intends? No, but he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He's listening to Rubio and the neocons. Scowcroft spoke out about that. There ain't nobody now in Washington with the guts or the gravitas to speak out now, and that's the damn shame.
Well, it doesn't look like a lot of adults are in the room in a serious way within corridors of power within the West. There is clearly, I mean, the this is the thing that we've been all kind of stressed about for so many years, and this is already there in the clean break doctrine, the idea of strategic decapitations and regime change that was put forth as the new policy even before 9/11 that would lead up towards the big trophy Iran. If Iran is, like, I'm trying to think of, like, what is the ultimate objective? If Iran is taken out, would that result in the Abraham Accords advancing? Would it result in the Board of Peace that we've not even talked about today being a greater success at restoring some idea of peace in the Middle East? Or would it just result in general chaos? I mean, I'm seeing more the orientation towards general chaos than anything else. Kit, I'll just leave it to you for the last sort of your thoughts on where this is all going. What do you think? And do you think there is a sane pathway that could defuse the orientation towards general world war at this stage? Or do you think that this is kind of, there's not a lot holding it back from the worst case scenario?
Well, I mean, I think that we're kind of we're living through the tail end of an absolutely catastrophic US policy, which we see from you mentioned the Epstein not leaks, the classified disclosures, and whether they play a role in this. There was one of the most interesting emails, which I don't think anyone's made nearly enough of, is in June 2014. Epstein was emailing Peter Thiel, who's the PayPal billionaire and Palantir, brain trust, God help us all. And Epstein says that he increasingly lends credence to Thiel's intentionality argument, which is the notion that the mess unfolding, particularly in West Asia, but elsewhere in the world, is what Obama really wanted, which was just to create mass chaos. And Thiel fires back, well, it's quite clear that the White House and the CIA and the Pentagon are very keen on ensuring the US is less involved with the rest of the world. And the more mess with lots of bad guys on different sides, the less we will do. Now, one of the things that is has powered Iran becoming taking a more assertive role within the region, but also globally, is because of the chaos that was unleashed, and the birth of ISIS and the destabilization of so many governments came from thinking that, well, the Obama administration, because of the unpopularity of the ongoing Iraq and Afghan occupations, decided to pull back, at least formally, from the former. It created an enormous amount of chaos. So Iran started arming itself, preparing for all-out war, hitherto it had no nuclear ambitions whatsoever. And of course, Khomeini, who's just been killed, issued a fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons. Now the US is involving itself, at least, in chaos that it itself has created. It is undertaking moves which is just going to create more chaos. I'm not sure there's necessarily a rhyme or reason to it. It very much seems, at least in this, in the specific context of the recent US-Israeli engagement, they weren't really expecting very much beyond, well, we'll batter them for a few days and then they'll see sense and they'll acquiesce to our demands. It's actually just made Iran more hostile. It's put them on the war footing, and no doubt there will be quite loud calls within the power structure for Iran to actually acquire nuclear weapons. I mean, maybe that this is a some kind of cunning 5D chess trap that Iran is walking into. I'm not sure, but I mean, it all seems very, very confused, and I think that it's important to bear in mind there are enduring fantasies of kind of American unipolar hegemony, which I think in Ukraine we've seen how that's hit a brick wall. We're seeing it currently hit a brick wall. Maybe there'll be more cavalry on the way to try and tip the scales in Washington and Tel Aviv's favor. But I just think that ultimately Western policymakers are living in a world that they don't really understand anymore. And they're still, doing the same things, employing the same strategies that worked previously that aren't really applicable, or they don't have the muscle, the financial and military might to see them through as they once did. And yeah, I think there's a lot there. There is an enormous amount of confusion, and I mean, something I'll end on is as I mentioned, I reported in the summer of 2024 on this very interesting report that was published by the JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security in America. It's this very shadowy, very influential Israeli, Zionist think tank, and it's behind the training of U.S. police forces by the Israeli occupation forces.
What are they called? What's this think tank?
JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security in America, and like they're also, I might add that to bring things back to Iraq again. Colin Powell gave that deranged speech to the UN where he waved that vial of anthrax, etc. He subsequently stated that the content of that speech was handed to him by the JINSA crowd, which is to say, kind of neocons, Zionists within the power structure. Anyway, JINSA published this report that was called Tyranny of Geography. And on the one hand, it acknowledged that the US was in real trouble in West Asia, and it stated, in the event that we wage war against Iran, then our base is going to be in real trouble. Our F-35 fighter jets, when they're not in the air, they are just lumps of metal sitting in the sun, and they're a very easy target for Iranian hypersonic and ballistic missiles. But then, by the same token, as illuminating and incisive as the report is in some areas, in others it's completely deranged. And it talks about how Operation True Promise was a total failure because it didn't destroy infrastructure, it didn't cause mass civilian casualties, it didn't cause mass destruction against Israel. And that wasn't the purpose of the very first True Promise. It was to demonstrate to the Americans and the Israelis and all their other Western backers that if we want to, we can cut through your air defense and we can cut through the much vaunted Iron Dome. But it wasn't taken that way. It was clearly again, there were influential elements of the power structure who thought Operation True Promise is the most the Iranians can do. This is the sum total of their efforts is firing a bunch of ineffectual drones at military bases and not killing anyone and not causing any destruction. And the report basically states, well, we should prepare for more of this, but we've got really nothing really to worry about. Now, I signed off my investigation by quoting Igor Korochenko, who is this Russian Russian kind of defense and military thinker, and he made this. It was a rather extraordinary quote at a summit back in 2016, where he said, "This Anglo-Saxon breed understands nothing but force." So, I think that this is important to bear in mind, because Operation True Promise was not intended as a show of force. It was intended as a demonstration of what could happen if Israel and the US keep messing with Iran. Well, we're seeing a show of force now, and the Americans and the Israelis are kind of running around like headless chickens and desperately pointing to the fact they killed Khomeini in order to try and finesse this and point to some kind of victory or some kind of purpose to what they were doing. But I mean, I think that they've stumbled into a quagmire, and I'm here for it. I'm kind of enjoying it, if I'm going to be brutally honest. I obviously don't want anyone to die, but in the same manner as the special military operation, there are decades when you F around and days when you find out. So yeah.
I would say, thank you, Kit. And last thing I'll just throw it at Ray here. It strikes me, Ray, that the moral impetus at this point, or a lot of the Arab client states that have been hosting U.S. military bases have a lot of responsibility at this point to possibly be the only thing I could imagine as a factor that could derail or change the course. I don't know if you agree or disagree, as far as, they were asked by the Iranian leadership, by Larijani, to act now to remove the U.S. influence. I suppose that implies Anglo-Zionist or American Zionist influence militarily from their countries, or else they are going to be subject of attacks, as we've already seen. They could, I think they could do it. I mean, it's possible. Do you think that they have the moral and political power to actually extricate the U.S. military from their zones of influence in order to possibly mitigate where this is going, or do you think that they don't have the power that I'm hoping that they do to change this course? What do you think, Ray? And also, if you have any final thoughts that you want to throw out there for people to think about as we go into the coming weeks ahead.
Well, Matt, moral is not a word that applies in any of these situations. Watching the UN Security Council yesterday told me enough about these Arab leaders that there's no hope for them to do what you're suggesting. I guess what I had some other thoughts here which escaped me, but it seems to me that we're going to have to ride this out, and that in the very near future, we're going to find out whether all these military experts were right in saying that the U.S. will run out of ammunition. I guess one other thought I have is I think we can fully expect a false flag operation mounted by Israel to keep the U.S. in, if there's any wavering at all. And they have the capability. They have submarines. They have quiet ones. So do the Russians and the Chinese. If there is an attack on an aircraft carrier or some other ship, this is going to be blamed on Iran, of course. And that will make it even more difficult for Trump to extricate himself. I agree with everything that Kit said. I wish I could remember the pithy comments that I was about to make at the end, but thanks very much for having me on with Kit and with Pelle. I consider it an honor to be able to speak to you guys. And let's just, as that prophet and statesman Donald J. Trump says, I guess we're going to see what happens.
All right. Wise, ominous last words for this week's show. But I look forward to meeting up and continuing our conversations in the weeks and months ahead. And I do pray that that adults can enter the room and bring some sanity before things get really off the rails. Yes,
I remember what I was going to say.
Okay, go.
When you're 86, sometimes the thoughts. Anyhow, you mentioned Larijani. How many people know that Larijani was in Moscow 3 weeks ago? Now, he's the national security advisor for Iran, right? Okay. So did he meet with his counterpart, Medvedev, or somebody else? Yeah, he did. But he also met with Putin for a courtesy of call, no, for hours. With whom did he also meet? The Chinese. He went to the Chinese embassy, okay? Now, Larijani's been around a long time, okay? He's got experience up the kazoo with the Revolutionary Guards, as well as the diplomatic and the national security. He's a big deal, okay? And why is he even more a big deal? Because the reports were just 2 days ago that Khamenei himself had designated Larijani to take his place in case he was killed. Now he's been killed. I have not seen anything about Larijani, but if those initial reports are true, Larijani is in a position not only to do what's necessary in Iran, but he has had this unique access to Putin and to the Chinese at the embassy in Moscow. And I think that speaks volumes, because Iran is not in this alone. Do I expect the Russians to send their naval ship down? No, I don't. The Chinese already have, to an extent. So that's the difference this time. The Russians will not permit it, neither will the Chinese, and they have enough influence and enough wherewithal to change this if Trump goes off half-cocked, even if there's a false flag attempt. Thanks for letting me get that stray thought back in there, but Larijani is really important.
That is really important, that came into your mind, I really appreciate ending with that, because that is a big deal, and I don't think people have fully realized. I didn't even know that was something floated. So very curious to see where that goes in the coming days and weeks ahead. All right, Ray, thank you so much. You're the last man standing in this, this race. Congratulations.
So far.
All right, and thank you everybody for watching us, and we'll tune in again in 2 weeks to Pluralia Dialogos. And for those who are interested in the Rising Tide Foundation work, every Sunday we do presentations. We're going to have something on the Trojan War at 2:00 Eastern time today. Troilus and Cressida and Shakespeare's treatment of that important story that has a lot of universal insights, including into what impacts today's world, that we don't want to replicate the type of mistakes that were made that certain Greeks had fallen into, that resulted in a dark age a long time ago. So that's going to be at 2:00 today. If anybody wants to join, write to me on risingtidefoundation.net. The contact section, I'll give you access to that live lecture. Yeah, Ray?
A final thought.
Yeah.
Odessa. Now we're talking about Ukraine. 3 years ago, Putin said, "Oh, Odessa, that beautiful city." Well, the question is whether Odessa could be a яблоко раздора, an apple of discontent. Talk about the Trojan War, or whether it could be a means by which we can reconcile irreconcilable differences. October of 2022, at the end of one of these year-long Q&As. What am I saying here? I'm saying that Putin is still open to sensible suggestions. He doesn't want to attack Odessa. In my view, that would be so bad for any Russians, okay? So there's a яблоко раздора, that's an apple of discord near this story, or it could be a way to negotiate. And last thing, Ukraine's not going to be anything without access to the sea. You know that. A lot of people know that. So the thought of taking over that whole coast and making Ukraine into a farmland for the rest of Europe, the Russians don't want that. They want a secure demarcation point so that the right wingers in Lvov and the rest of the places in Western Ukraine don't attack Russia or try to get into NATO. And it would suffice for the Russians to have a multinational order to recognize and regulate what happens in Odessa. So there could be a viable Ukrainian state and not a terrorist organization right on the other side of their border, of their buffer zone. Sorry to keep having these extra thoughts, but that seemed to be relevant when you talk about the apple of discord and the Trojan Wars.
Yeah, that brought it full circle. That's good. Well, thank you, Ray. All right. And thank you, everybody.
No more
All right.
extra thoughts.
All right. Bye, everybody. Bye, Ray. Take care.
Thank you.